Hey, hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay, good. That was easy. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Eileen Ruby. Am I too close to the mic? Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. I'm the board chair of the Bay Area Jewish Federation. On behalf of my fellow board members, welcome and thank you all for being here. When my friends ask me if I'm enjoying my position, my first response is, well, I'm not bored. That's mostly good news because so much has been accomplished this past year, and that's what you're going to hear about this morning. But first, I want to make clear that what we do here is a community undertaking. We need our donors and our volunteers and our community partners, many of whom are here today, including professionals from Berkeley and Stanford Hillels, Jewish Family and Community Services of the East Bay, the JCCs of San Francisco Peninsula and Marin, Hebrew Free Loan, Jewish Learning Works, Urban Adama. Please forgive me if I've left somebody out. Can I ask all the Jewish professionals just to stand up? Athlete. I'm sorry, Naomi, I left out Shalom Bayit. Okay. So thank you. Thank you for your dedication and the hard work you put into creating welcoming, safe, and vibrant spaces to explore Judaism and Jewish life. Together, all of us are a powerful force for good. And thank you to the donors who make this work possible. Whether you gave to our annual campaign or Israel Emergency Fund, participated in one of our giving circles, or made grants and impact loans through your donor advised fund or supporting foundation, you have made a significant difference in the Jewish community in the Bay Area and in Israel. In fact, collectively, our community has donated close to $200 million this year to some of the most important issues of our time, from fighting anti-Semitism to providing emergency assistance after October 7th to strengthening democracy. We are facing challenges many of us never thought we would see in our lifetimes. An unprecedented uptick in anti-Semitism, hateful rhetoric, vandalized Jewish businesses. But still, we have a lot to be thankful for. Excuse me. Whenever we've been tested, we've emerged together stronger. We're here today to reflect on our partnerships and collaborations and all that we faced and accomplished during this challenging year. We're going to get things started this morning with a video. Excuse me. I'm so sorry. We're going to have a video now.
We have breaking news out of Israel this morning where Hamas has launched a surprise attack.
We are getting a look now at the devastation.
So many Israeli casualties from the massacre at that music festival.
Thousands of people were there at the time.
There are believed to be at least 100 people still being held inside of Gaza by Hamas militants, among them children.
שאני עדיין חולמת. באיזשהו שלב אני הסתכלתי על הדרום ועברתי אירוע, ובכל אירוע היו הרוגים. ילדים, חיילים, הורים.
After October 7th, so many of us here in Israel, we're still there. We're in October 7th. We're kind of cemented in that day. For us, you know, the ability to move on, to move forward, is very, very limited.
Immediately, we opened an emergency fund and donations started pouring in. We raised $22 million, and I'm just so proud of how quickly the community came together to really help our brothers and sisters in Israel meet their most basic emergency and urgent humanitarian needs as a result of the attack.
We saw a wave of solidarity, which we haven't seen up until now for many, many years. The Jewish communities around the world chipped in an amazing way, including our Bay Area Jewish community. And that was not only heartwarming, it was a sense that we are one. To give an example of one organization that actually took their major work and major specialty and adapted it in order to address current challenges is an organization called in Hebrew Agal Sheli, My Wave. The kids who survived the October 7th massacre, the trauma was actually felt in their body. So their tool of surfing was actually an amazing potential vehicle for these kids to actually work with and let go the trauma from a physical point of view.
As there has been a steady increase in anti-Semitism, including acts of anti-Semitism right here in our own backyards, I think it's just been an opportunity for us to come together to think about how we can address these issues.
You know, it's funny because this is not new for us, but this is different. This is different in the sense that it is across the country happening. And so it is therefore, I think, firing up a lot of people who are really involved with it.
Since October 7th, we have seen a dramatic rise in people reaching out for help, for resources, for supports.
There's a lot of trauma, there's a lot of grief, and so much anxiety.
We receive funds from the Federation through a variety of sources that support all of our work within the Jewish community.
What we were able to do in the beginning was to pull together very quickly lots of support groups for people to be able to have conversations, sit together so that they felt like they had a safe space to talk. Because what I was getting calls from parents was, I don't know what to say. My child's calling me and crying. And I would tell parents, listen, cry with them. We don't have answers. This is a really unprecedented experience we are all going through. And I think that so much for teens and young people to be able to hear, I don't have an answer either, but I'm not going anywhere, is really powerful.
Times are hard right now. We see suffering globally and we see suffering here in our local community. What gives me hope is that the Jewish community is really rallying.
We're gonna go through it. We're gonna be much better afterward. I mean, we're gonna grow stronger. The one message that we keep on, telling people is hope is extremely important, but it's not a work plan. So we are coming up with significant work plans in our communities and in our country to rebuild together.
We've been delighted to work with so many donors who want to do good work in Israel, whether it's by making a gift to the emergency fund, doing something to combat anti-Semitism locally, or even an impact investment, the opportunity to help small businesses that really need our help in Israel right now. We're lucky to have partners that are doing everything they can to make sure that we continue to have a thriving and flourishing Jewish community right here at home. What I'm really looking forward to, what I'm hopeful for, is everything we have ahead of us in the next year and in the years to come. I think the most important thing we can do at Federation right now is make sure that we're building an institution that will meet the needs of a next generation now and into the future.
Good morning. It's nice to see you. I'm Joyce Sisiski. I'm the CEO of the Jewish Federation, and I'm delighted to welcome you here to 121 Stewart Street. And I want to tell you, I've worked in the Jewish community for 25 years now, and I can't think of a more important time to be working together to build community, to strengthen our connections, to anticipate and respond to the communal needs, and to deepen Jewish values, not just for us, but for generations to come. This coming Shabbat, we're going to read from the book of Numbers, Parshat Bamidbar, which means in the wilderness. Most notably, God instructs Moses to count members of the 12 tribes. It's a kind of biblical census. And there are two things that really stand out to me. Wilderness is a metaphor for the times that we're living in, unknown and uncertain. Like the ancient Israelites who were wandering through the desert, we're at an unparalleled time in history, with many of us wondering, sometimes with anxiety, what does the future have in store for us? Not just in Israel, but right here in the Bay Area. Will we be safe? Will we make it to the promised land, to the other side safe and whole? These are questions many of us have on our minds. My other thought is about the census itself. This is one of many census-taking instructions that God gives starting earlier in the book of Exodus. But why? Rashi comments, because they were dear to God, God counts them all the time. When they went out of Egypt, God counted them. When many of them fell for having worshiped the golden calf, God counted them to make sure how many were left. And when the divine presence was about to dwell among them, God again took the census. For on the first day of Nisan, the tabernacle was erected, and shortly afterwards, on the first day of Iyar, God counted them again. The people are counted by name, and the census gives every member of the community the chance to come before Moses and Aaron and be recognized as an individual person of worth. Still, the only way that they survived in the wilderness was by doing it together, side by side, or kind of like what Eileen just said, because they're stronger together. It was together, as you saw in the video, that we're here today, and thousands of us who are right here in this room and others, some of them totally unknown to Federation, made gifts for the Israel Emergency Campaign. You heard we raised $22 million, from a few dollars to hundreds of thousands of dollars, and even several $1 million gifts. It was really quite extraordinary. And that was for urgent humanitarian relief. And together, actually, even in just the few days since this video was made last week, the federations in total have raised $850 million across North America. That is quite extraordinary. So your gifts to the annual campaign, that's allowed the Federation to expand Live Secure, our premier community security program that works across Northern California. And in the last few months alone, we have provided security trainings and threat assessments to hundreds of professionals working in local Jewish institutions. And Rafi, where are you? Can you just raise your hand? Here he is, sitting right here. He's our Senior Director of Community Security. I don't know if anybody else from your team is here. Rafi's the right kind of person to thank, because most of what he does, you'll never read about in a brochure at the Federation or see on TV. It's everything from violent graffiti to bomb threats that are being called in, sometimes dozens of them at a time. And so we're really grateful for you and the entire community security team. We've granted over $500,000 to local Jewish institutions. We call them micro grants to help them secure some of the most basic needs that they have at their institutions, things like security upgrades, fences, cameras, and guards. And we've also provided grants to all of the 8 Hillels in Northern California, so our Jewish students have places where they can feel safe, not just to fight anti-Semitism, but just to go to school and be Jewish. The Bay Area Jewish Federation is the single largest funder of Jewish causes in the state of California. And we're powered by a number of things, not only the annual campaign. When you walked in the door, you probably saw that name of walls downstairs. Those are people in our community who have left gifts. Some of them are no longer with us, who had an idea that they should be leaving money for the future to help build Jewish community for generations to come. And their commitment to the Jewish community lives on through the Centennial Campaign. So you listen to this video. It was a lot about Israel. There's also so much really amazing, wonderful, joyful Judaism that's taking place in the Bay Area. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about what that is and what your gifts support. The Federation provides, with your help, free Jewish-themed books to 10,000 families through the PJ Library program. We educate and inspire teens about Tikkun Olam, Tzedakah, and leadership through the Jewish Teen Foundation, which just had their graduating class a couple weeks ago, and Dillard Teen Fellows, which is getting ready to culminate their summer. We've provided $3 million in scholarships to hundreds of children and young adults so they can attend our amazing day schools and our preschools and camps and programs like Birthright. My kids are getting ready to go to Jewish summer camp. One goes to Maccabi and one goes to Tawanga. I feel like it's just such an important part of the summer and something they've been looking forward to after a hard year. And we do a ton of work in early childhood education, thanks to our partnership now with Jewish Learning Works. I know Dana is here somewhere. If you can raise your hand, you're sitting all the way in the back. Thank you for all of the wonderful work you're doing. And Federation too, and we'll continue to take care of the vulnerable in our community by supporting institutions like Jewish Family and Children's Services, the Campus for Jewish Living, and Shalom Bayit. And with our partnership, we're able to do this. So thank you. You saw the professionals standing up in the room. These are the people that are driving everything that happens in the community. They're allowing us to have this kind of joyful Judaism. And the Federation is working far beyond the annual campaign through innovation and imagination with donor-advised fund holders who are also turning into investors in our community beyond just a regular donation. For example, with donors, and donor-advised fund holders, we have invested more than $50 million in a variety of impact areas reflecting shared Jewish values to address issues from investing in minority-owned businesses to climate change and economic recovery here and in Israel. The Federation, in fact, with the help of Laura Lauder, who I see is here, just launched a new $10 million fund to support Israeli businesses like restaurants and art centers that need really our help because they can't survive from the economic fallout from the war. These are the kind of cultural institutions and places of business that make going to Israel so much fun because they're kind of like what Israel is all about. And it's nice to be able to support that from afar with an investment. So we're committed to doing more, we're committed to doing better, and we're certainly committed to doing that in person with you. And I want to thank you again just for being here today, for showing up. It means a lot. I think the best part of the event is really just talking and schmoozing with everybody. We don't always get a chance to do that. So I hope you will continue to come back over and over to make our community joyful and meaningful, to be able to grieve together and also celebrate a lot of our wins. So I'm going to end today. I've already thanked you for being here and your generosity. If you haven't made your gift to the annual campaign, you still have until June 30th. I hope you do that. And I hope you will also make your gifts to all of the Jewish institutions that are here today, the JCCs, the Hillels, JCRC, Jewish Learning Works, Shalom Bayit, Urban Adamat. These are the institutions that are driving us, and they need your help more than ever. So I just want to make sure that I thank them again for all their leadership. So I'll just end, and then I'm going to call Professor Hassner up. These times are uncertain, and just like when we were in the desert, let's stand up individually and collectively to be counted, because the Jewish people have persevered for centuries, and today is not really any different. And I think knowing that we're doing it together in community is the most important thing. So thank you for being here. Now I get to just have a fun part of my job, which is asking Professor Hassner like 1,000 questions that I think we all have on our minds, given what's going on college campuses across the United States. Some of you joined us for an event we had last week with Professor Mark Dollinger from SF State and Paula Pretlow, who's a trustee of Northwestern University. I know because everywhere I go, people ask me what is going on the college campuses. And myself, I think I've spent more time in the last few months with Professor Hassner than I have in the whole 8 years that I've lived in the Bay Area. We're lucky to have such extraordinary Jewish leadership on the college campuses when we need it most. So I'm going to invite Professor Hassner to come join me up here. He is the Chancellor's Professor of Political Science and Helen Diller Family Chair in Israel Studies at UC Berkeley. He's made national headlines for staging a 2-week sit-in in his office as a way to voice his concern about student safety during the encampments and protests. Actually, it happened before the encampment and protests, your sit-in. Having said that, you paved the way for having safety for all the students who were going through that. So it came just at the right time. When Ron isn't making what John Lewis has called good trouble, he said he's exploring the role of ideas, practices, and symbols in international security with particular attention to the relationship between religion and violence. So I'm going to ask you to come sit up here so I can ask him talk. I'm delighted he's here and I hope you'll welcome me. I hope you welcome.
I think it is.
Okay. He has a loud voice, so you'll be able to hear him.
I don't know. Do I?
So I was going to say the last time that I saw you was when you were camping in your office, but that turned out not to be true because I've seen you like 3 times since. Having said that, I did get to visit you in your office while you were camping in there. And you garnered a lot of media attention from both local and national outlets, including USA Today and Newsweek, but you also inspired a lot of other faculty members to sort of take up this cause. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about your experience, what you were protesting, and why you did this in the first place.
Thank you, and it's awesome to be here. I'm sorry for those of you who get to see my side, but it's my good side. I was protesting for 2 reasons. The secondary reason was that I wanted to exert some pressure, some very mild pressure on my campus to act on policies that I suspected they were going to act on anyway, but I needed them to get a bit of a move on, primarily to make sure that protesters who were harassing Jewish students were called out, and that this harassment would stop and students were able to feel safe.
You're talking about it like at Sathergate?
Sathergate or at the encampment where Jewish students often were targeted for either they were just shouted at or, verbally harassed or stopped, actually blocked or video filmed, sometimes pushed, sometimes physically harmed, rarely, but sometimes. So that's one thing I requested. Another thing I requested was anti-Semitism training for all incoming students. And the last thing I requested was that speakers whose talks were interrupted would be invited back so that they could complete their talks. That was the secondary reason for my protest. The primary reason for my protest was that the Jewish community on campus, especially the students, were feeling increasingly disenfranchised and helpless and angry. And I could sense that they were organizing in an increasingly agitated way. And I was very, very worried that this would lead to a real clash. And I wanted to signal to those students that there was a wide swath of faculty and staff who were taking care of business, who were supporting them, who cared about them. So mostly my office became sort of an agora, a marketplace, where starting at 8 o'clock in the morning and all the way often up to 11:30 midnight, students gathered mostly to eat, lean on one another, kvetch, learn from one another, lodge complaints, meet staff and faculty. The atmosphere was wonderful. I counted about 100 to 150 people a day. Those were not the same people every day. So it was a lot of people over the course of 2 weeks. And it sent a very clear signal. We are a big community. There are many Jewish students of different backgrounds. By the way, there were also non-Jewish students, non-Jewish faculty who came. Here's the world that supports you, and we can put our heads together and think about how to act. So that was the goal. Overall, I had a lot of fun. It wasn't super comfortable sleeping on a mattress on the floor. I don't.
Really little mattress.
Yeah, I
And
also
it's
don't know
all-
why I insisted on this no showering rule, which was just. I should add, perhaps as an aside, I have no experience in protesting. I grew up in a completely apolitical household. My parents never took me to protests. I've never participated in first time I protested was the march here in San Francisco.
Unity
The
rally.
Unity rally about a week before I locked myself in my
I
office.
love the story you told me about how you showed up to that rally.
So it was the first time I ever took my family to a protest, and we showed up like schlemiels. We had no signs because we didn't know that you did signs. We had no T-shirts. We brought Chinese food because, you know, Yangtze is right there. So we showed up with these little, little boxes of dumplings and said, what do you do now? We didn't have bullhorns. We didn't have flags. Similarly, I had no idea that sleeping on your mattress in your office was somehow unusual. I just didn't know what to, I knew I couldn't do a hunger strike. Because one is anti-Israeli student with the pizza, the hunger strike would be over like within 2 hours. So I thought, let's try this thing. I don't know, am I supposed to shower? Let's just say I'm not. Presumably I'm supposed to make coffee and tea for people. The atmosphere was, I'd say somber, but positive and uplifting. I described it to one journalist as being, in a way, Shiva-like, because the occasion was a serious occasion, but the goal was for us to find support in one another.
So did you think it would take, you were there for 2 weeks. What did you think when you set out to do this? Like, did you think it was going to take 2 weeks? Do you think it would take a day or two?
I didn't think anything. I've never done anything like this before. Most of my colleagues were rather skeptical that this would yield anything. They knew I was very stubborn and that I would sit in that office for 2 months if I had to. I was not going to leave until the university responded.
And they did.
They did. I got a phone call from Carol Christ 2 weeks, 13 days in. I don't know how she got my cell phone number. I think she has everybody's cell phone number. Not only did she respond positively to all my requests, I intentionally did not call them demands, but threw in all sorts of other, what I thought were very, very kind gestures. And so I spent yet another night at the office, consulted with the students and said, here's what I just heard from the chancellor. Do you think I can go home? Because if you don't, I'll stay. And the student leaders, Chabad, Hillel, said, yeah, you can go. You really need a shower. You can go.
So she met your requests and more, really. So did you feel satisfied at the time?
Absolutely. I still feel satisfied. And starting this fall, every incoming Berkeley student will receive anti-Semitism training as provided by the Berkeley Anti-Semitism Training Initiative. Observers posted first at Sather Gate and then at the encampment. Didn't really intervene. They could have done a little more, but they mostly observed and recorded and reported on any inappropriate incidents. The speaker, you may remember, there was an Israeli speaker who came and a sort of a mob formed to prevent that talk from happening, was invited back while I was still in my office. In fact, he came to my office and spoke to an even larger audience. We have now, especially at the Helen Diller Institute for Jewish Law and Israel Studies, since October 7, we've given some 20 talks related to October 7, whether they are with Israeli journalists, with military experts, with scholars who study sexual crimes, with scholars who study terrorism, and the audiences at each of these talks just grow and grow and grow.
That's good to hear that people want to keep learning and discussing.
Our classes, which is most of what we provide at the Institute, are oversubscribed. We have usually about a dozen to 15 Israel undergraduate fellows. So these are Berkeley undergraduates, Jewish and not, who really want to study Israel, want to know more about Israel. Usually it's about 10, 15 of them. Our numbers have now doubled since October 7. We have about 30 kids who work closely with visiting scholars, who study Israel, who teach classes of their own about Israel, who engage in projects and travel to Israel. Interest has grown, and not just from Jewish students at all, I would say.
I'm going to ask you some questions about anti-Semitism. Can you talk about the difference between intentional and incidental anti-Semitism? And is being anti-Zionist anti-Semitic.
Softballs, great. So in the next hour and a half, I will elucidate. So this is it complicated stuff? Maybe not for this audience. It's complicated to explain to an audience that does not know what it means to be Jewish. For example, many students don't understand the difference between being Jewish and being Israeli, or being Muslim and being Arab. They just don't know. So you know, you sort of have to build on these things. I wrote an op-ed, this was before my sit-in, in the Wall Street Journal, reporting on a survey I had done among college students across the United States. I asked the survey firm to pose questions to 250 undergraduates. The first question was, what do you think about the slogan, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free"? And about 85% of the students supported the slogan to some extent, some enthusiastically, some less so. And then I asked two unkind questions. Name the river, name the sea. The professional term is nothing. Now comes the interesting part. Next question. How do you feel about solutions to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Apartheid, elimination of Israel, one-state solution, two-state solution. The majority opted for two-state solution. I then asked those students, here's a map. Sorry, I've got to flip it around. Here's the river. Here's the sea. Here are the Palestinian territories. Here's Israel. Do you see how from the river to the sea is incompatible with two-state solution? 75% of students, upon seeing that map for the first time in their life, I presume, said, oh, it really is incompatible. Well, never mind then about the whole river to the sea. In other words, there is tremendous ignorance. In the case of from the river to the sea, this ignorance leads to a call for genocide. It's a genocidal statement. It's a dog whistle, but it's a genocidal statement. But it is, in a way, again, the product of sort of an innocent boorishness, but there's also an openness to learning. And it doesn't take hours and hours in the classroom to clear this up. You just show them a map which they've never, ever seen before. So this is what I'd call sort of incidental anti-Semitism. And I think there's a lot of it out there. There's also a lot of intentional anti-Semitism out there. Really, really straightforward. You saw the graffiti. This is a graffiti from the Berkeley campus, right? Whatever it was, Zionism is Nazism, or you know, swastika equals Star of David. That's intentional and it's malicious, and a lot of it is verbally violent, even physically violent. Your harder question is, you know, what's the relationship between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism? They are very closely related. They are analytically distinct terms, like racism and xenophobia. Those words mean different things. You can be a racist and not hate strangers. You can hate strangers, but not be a racist. But in practice, those two things overlap massively. So could you hypothetically be anti-Zionist without being anti-Semitic? You could, and vice versa. But in practice, my slogan used to be, those are two sides of the same coin. I'm now changing my slogan. They're the same side of the same coin. And in fact, by some interpretations, anti-Zionism is the worst form of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semites usually want to hound Jews, terrify them, intimidate them, control them, harm them, maybe kill them in order to get rid of them. Anti-Zionists want to leave them no place to run to. So in many ways, that's among the cruelest forms of anti-Semitism out there. Students, again, need to be taught this. Why would they possibly know it? Right? If you think about the demographic of the average Berkeley student, you know, an Asian American or a Latino engineering student or computer science student, I've had them in my classrooms. They are eager to learn. They are amazed when I tell them, for example, about the expulsions from Spain in the 15th century. A Latina student said, expulsion, how many of them? And I said, all of them. She said, what do you mean expulsion of all of the Jews of Spain? How can that be? And I said, sit tight. We'll talk about Portugal next, then we'll talk about France, and we'll talk about Germany, then we'll talk about Italy. We'll go through them one by one. Eventually we'll get to the Middle East. We'll talk about Syria, we'll talk about Egypt, we'll talk about Libya. hold on, there's more to come, 100%. She had no, why would she know? Why would she know? How much do I know about, Korean history or Nigerian history? But then I also don't stand in the middle of my campus and scream free Tibet. So that's the problem, that there's a disjuncture between the enthusiasm with which this protest has been picked up and a deep lack of knowledge. I would like to think, and my surveys show this again and again, that the majority of students on my campus don't understand what the little red triangles mean they've been painting on the sidewalk. They don't know what the slogan, globalize the Intifada, means. I know because I've asked them. Globalize the Intifada, what does this mean? Well, there should be anti-colonial uprising to free all people. Okay, Tachlis, what does this mean? There should be anti-colonial uprising to free all. Yes, I understand, but here today in the United States, how does that translate into action? There should be a global uprising, right? It's these sort of empty slogans for them, which for a Jewish audience is not an empty slogan. For us, it's a very alarming statement. I happen to be in the very, very lucky position of being a teacher. And since I believe that teaching can fix some of this, I am upbeat and optimistic.
I love that, especially about you. It's interesting. When I was at SF State, when I was visiting the encampment there was all this graffiti. It was like a huge peace sign that said resistance by any means necessary. And I thought, who did this graffiti? This was, it's just the stopping and connecting the dots sounds like it's been something that's been important in your role in this.
There's another reason I'm optimistic. And I'm going to wax only slightly philosophical here, but it connects closely to the reason why we are all in this room together. This side of the debate, I'm generalizing here, but the Jewish community is in the business of building things. And in the case of the Berkeley campus, this means building an amazing Center for Jewish Studies, building this amazing Helen Diller Institute for Israel Studies, the Magnus, institution after institution, building and building and building and building. And every year we have more classes and more students and more events and more trips to Israel. The opposition, and you can use that for whatever you like, is building nothing. They have no building agenda. The agenda is entirely to pull down what is built. So it came as a great source of pride to me and my colleagues at the Helen Diller Institute that one of the demands of the protesters was stop all academic ties with Israel, pull down the Helen Diller Institute. And I thought, wow, we've really made it. Now they're pissed off, and that's great. That to me is sort of the ultimate sign that we're doing something really, really important. I heard actually quite recently for the first time that one of the things the protesters were offered were resources to start building Palestine studies on the Berkeley campus. I don't know how you feel about that. And it doesn't matter how you feel about that because the protesters were utterly disinterested. Utterly disinterested. We don't want to build anything. We don't want to send money to Gaza. We don't want to send resources. We don't want to help. We want to take down. We want to pull. We want to burn. We want to set things on fire. How can I not be optimistic? I'm on the building side. We're doing stuff. And you can walk through the Jewish community of San Francisco. We can see what we've built and the amazing things we've accomplished. That's why I'm optimistic.
I love that. Tell us more about your role as co-director at the Helen Diller Institute for Jewish Law and Israel Studies, what role the Institute has in working with the administrative leadership, and how you've been working with them as an institute to address anti-Semitism on campus.
Right. So prior to October 7, our main job was to teach students about Israel. And we do that in a way that no other Israel Institute in the country does it, which is by bringing half a dozen to a dozen Israeli professors, the best of the best, to the Berkeley campus to teach classes all year long. Sociologists, anthropologists, historians, lawyers, political scientists, historians, poets, dance instructors. We bring them to Berkeley, they teach classes all year long, all around campus, reaching well over 1,000 students a year. I think there are more classes taught on Israel on the Berkeley campus as a result of our institute than there are classes on China or Russia or pick your country, any other country. And that teaches students about Israel in a nuanced and careful and fair way. And of course, also involves There's a summer program in Israel. There's a winter trip to Israel. There are student exchanges. After October 7, it turned out that part of why this was so important is because it created a network. It created a network of faculty. We have about 40 Berkeley faculty in our orbit. They come to our talks, they contribute to our events, they host our visiting scholars, they work together, they write papers with them, they teach classes with them. But also all these students who are in our classes and who are our undergraduate fellows are all in this orbit together. And that formed one of the networks that students were able to lean on when things got really tough on campus. Many of those same people sit on the board of the Magnus. Many of those same people teach in the Center for Jewish Studies, as do I. Many of the same people sit on the Hillel board and the Chabad board. It's a very, very large network. Harvard, Columbia, they don't have these institutions. They're now rushing to build them, and they're consulting with us as they do. Stanford is starting to build that kind of network. We're deeply involved and very enthusiastic to help, because the Stanford network will then also be a network for us to lean on and vice versa. We can give talks there. They can come and give talks with them. We can host people together. We've now started doing that. So I think the network value is fantastic. We've come now to a point where we have so many guest scholars, so many students who are interested in taking our classes, so much energy behind this, that we appeal to the university to be able to offer a minor in Israel studies. Again, as I've already hinted, I estimate the success of our institute based on how angry it makes other people. The minor was just approved. It makes many people really angry. And the reason why it makes many people angry is because the goal of many of these protests is not to harm Israel. I mean, can you imagine anybody in Israel caring about a tent encampment at UCSF or at San Francisco State? Like, why would an Israeli decision maker care about these things? The goal of these protests, in my mind, is one only: to prevent Jewish students and faculty from attending a campus, to create campuses that are free of Jews. If you want a place where you're welcome, if you want a place where you can learn about Israel, we can learn about Judaism, this is not it. Go somewhere, go to Brandeis, go somewhere else. A minor in Israel studies does exactly the opposite. Not only is this not a place you should shun because of its reputation, this is a place you should intentionally come to because of its reputation in Jewish studies and Israel studies. As my grandmother would say, oif tafke, right? On purpose, you should choose Berkeley as the place to which you send your undergraduate, your kid or your grandkid, because it is a place of excellence now, without doubt, the strongest, the biggest, the most successful Israel Institute in the country.
So just to be clear, and we were talking about this a few minutes before we started, is it safe for us to send our kids to Berkeley?
Not only is it safe for you, in my mind, you're obligated to do so. Because why would you send your kid to a second-rate school? Why would you not send your kid to the best Jewish studies and Israel studies programs in the country? Why would you cede that ground? We are no longer 18th century Polish Jews escaping the Cossacks as they chase us from one village to the next. We're done with that stuff. We're Zionists. So we put down a flag and we say, thus far and no further, right? We don't retreat from Harvard and from Stanford and from Columbia because there are people who don't want us here. On the contrary, if there was ever a time when we used to run away from these places, we are now, in the Zionist era, running towards them. We will put our money there. We will put our children there. We will invest our time there. We will send our best faculty there. We will ensure that those schools have academic exchanges with Israel, bring Israelis there, send our students from there to Israel. That at least has been my philosophy. We are not talking physical safety, right? I mean, in terms of physical safety, the concern is, I would say, quite small, though there have been very unpleasant incidents, including on the Berkeley campus, to which the university reacted, vehemently with arrests and police reports, et cetera. The safety is often a feeling of, I'm in the minority here, I'm not wanted. My voice will not be heard. So speak more loudly. Show up in bigger numbers. Berkeley, like Stanford, has built two of the most amazing Hillels in the country. If you don't send your kids, those tables will stand empty on Shabbat evening. If you don't send your kids to Berkeley to take classes in Israel studies, our classes on Hebrew literature and Hebrew poetry and Hebrew history and Israeli law and gender in Israel and sociology of Israel, our classes will be empty. All these institutions we built will be there for nothing. Who will elect the next student representative to the student council who's Jewish? If Jewish students don't come and don't vote. That's the plan. That is the purpose behind all this. I toured the country with my 18-year-old son, Mikey, who was applying to college. And at every student visiting weekend, there was a delegation, a small delegation of anti-Israel protesters positioned right by the front gate. You know, blonde, blue-eyed girls with keffiyehs around their neck. Just to signal, if you thought that this was a happy campus for pro-Israeli visitors, you're wrong. Go somewhere else. So where are you going to go? Right? You could have maybe 10 years ago said, maybe I won't send my kid to Berkeley. You know, it's not safe there. Now you know the truth. Safe? It's not safe anywhere. Maybe in the past you would have not sent your kids to Berkeley and instead sent them to Brown or MIT or Harvard. Now you know the truth about Brown, MIT, and Harvard. It's no different. This was always the truth. The difference is that Berkeley has really built these amazing institutions. You probably do know that we are the only university in the United States with its own Jewish museum. That's the Magnus. Third largest collection of Jewish artifacts in the United States. That we have, as I already mentioned, the best and biggest Israel Studies Institute in the country, the Helen Diller Institute. That we have a fantastic Jewish Studies program. That we have the only kosher dining room of any West Coast university. It's an awesome place with thousands and thousands of Jewish students. Why would you send your kid anywhere else?
Okay, I'm going to change the topic to something else that I've really enjoyed talking to you about, and I know you're very passionate about, which is free speech. So the free speech movement began in 1964 when Berkeley students protested university restrictions on some of their political activities on campus. Do you think that we need to place restrictions on free speech and anti-Semitic speech? And what separates hate speech from acceptable discourse? We get this question probably more than anything else.
Yeah. And my opinion on it is, I am told, somewhat controversial. And I validate and value other opinions. In other words, I realize that my opinion is not the only opinion. It's not the only logically consistent opinion. It's an opinion, I think, that stems in part, I'm now psychoanalyzing myself, from the fact that I was raised in Israel. I spent my entire youth in Israel. I am not scared of words. I'm scared of hand grenades and guns. I'm scared of, Iranian medium-range missiles, more so when they have atomic warheads. I'm not scared of graffiti and slurs and statements. But I recognize that many other people are. They would say that I'm sort of privileged to not worry about these things. I actually feel exactly the opposite is true. I think you have to live in a very, very safe part of the world in order for the biggest danger in your life to be someone's words. You're really quite lucky to have never had a gun pointed in your face. And so you're scared of words. Because I'm a big L liberal, I think words are very important. They convey a lot of information. And I worry about the silencing of other people's words, especially when those words are threatening. I want to know who the bastards are. I want to know what their plans are. I want everybody to know, together with me, what their intentions are. And so I'm always a little uncomfortable when graffiti goes up somewhere and everybody's very quick to erase it, so that they can later say, anti-Semitism? I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't seen any anti-Semitism on this campus. Well, it was here yesterday, but somebody whitewashed it. literally whitewashed it. If I had my druthers, every time a hateful statement goes up, it will be put behind glass and a label would be attached with a date that would say, this is what it looks like. This is anti-Semitism in the year 2024. look who's written it and look who they're threatening, right? So you can't gaslight me and pretend that I'm making this stuff up. Yeah, I don't think speech should be censored. On the other hand, I don't think violence is speech. So when the protesters, the New York Times likes to call them pro-Palestinian protesters, but they are nothing of the sort. So when the anti-Israeli protesters put up, propaganda signs and slogans and sort of vague calls, that's speech. And it's part of the Berkeley tradition to allow that speech. When they start blocking people with their bodies, pushing them, and in one case, strangling and punching, that's no longer speech in my mind. That's illegal and that should be prohibited. But I'll note just an aside, I'm not a lawyer. So my opinion here is very much sort of that of a political philosopher.
Well, in follow-up, I'd ask you about BDS too, because this was a tactic deployed before October 7th, and it's hard to tell if this was BDS was a successful movement, and whether or not also, like free speech, limiting people's ability to protest is maybe not in our long-term interest when we think about protecting democracy at the highest level as a place that is important for Jews to be able to thrive.
So to my mind, we throw two things into the BDS basket, which doesn't serve us well. It serves BDS well, but doesn't serve us well. We throw into the BDS basket both BDS itself, boycotts, divestments, sanctions. So these are sort of legal, economic, administrative moves. And we, the Jewish community, throw into the same basket anti-Israel protest, anti-Israel criticism, dislike of Israel, all the way up to anti-Zionism, which is not part of BDS, right? It's part of the sort of marketplace of opinions. The first of these, BDS technically, those three, the B, the D, and the S, has failed fantastically. Fantastically. And if any one of us had doubts as to, how should we rate BDS on a scale from 0 to 10, it's now been ongoing for 30 years. For 30 years. Do you know how many campuses have passed BDS? 0 campuses in the United States. 0. Occasionally, the Allgemeiner or one of its sort of sister papers will say, University of North Carolina passes BDS. No. The Student Union of the University of North Carolina has passed BDS. There's 12 of them, and 6 voted in favor, and 4 voted against, and 2 abstained. But not a single university has engaged in BDS. 0 university in 30 years. 0 companies that have cut ties, 0 countries that have cut ties as a result of BDS. On that front, BDS is a spectacular failure. And if we ever had a doubt, you just need to look at the global response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the speed at which the world economy shut out Russia in a way that must have made anti-Israel agitators very upset. I mean, it took a week for McDonald's and Starbucks, and one after one after one after one. Immediately. So that's on the BDS front, abject failure. It's harder to estimate the sort of general public feel about Israel, which is not the BDS program. BDS shouldn't get credit for it. BDS does not aspire to it. This is sort of in the realm of, are people happy to vacation in Israel? Would people like to send their kids to do study abroad in Israel? Are people curious to learn about Israel? There, I think it's very, very hard to estimate for several reasons. First, because the minority speaks very, very loudly. When I actually do surveys and I ask students things like, here's a list of 20 countries, put a check mark next to a country that you would gladly travel to. 85% of Berkeley students include Israel on that list. They would gladly go. The classes, as I've already said, are classes on Israel, whether it's Israeli literature or Israeli law or social protest in Israel or, Israeli poetry. Our classes are massively oversubscribed. People really, really want to learn, and primarily not Jewish students. Of course, also Jewish students, but students from all walks of life. Is there currently a wellspring of support for Israel in the United States? Surveys actually suggest that there is, but probably less so than there was half a year ago. There is a war, after all, going on. The casualties in that war on both sides are higher than at any other point in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The news is very slanted, and the news is currently very polarized. Nonetheless, Americans overwhelmingly support Israel. The question is, what will the next generation look like? So people often point in these surveys to the fact that younger Americans, while still very supportive of Israel, are less supportive. This raises two questions. First, could it really be that as you grow older, you become smarter? The answer is yes. Second, how supportive of Israel were the older members of that survey when they were 20 years old? You'll remember the time when Joy was 20 years old, 7 years ago. You know, you had your Che Guevara t-shirt. You stood in the middle of campus screaming, you know, Marxism forever. Whatever was fashionable, maybe it was free Tibet.
I went to Brandeis.
Whatever was fashionable at the time, right? We're supposed to do these things when we're 20 because 20-year-old students, I mean, they're unemployed, they have a hell of a lot of time on their hands, their actions are without any consequence whatsoever. Why would they not stand in the middle of Sproul Plaza and scream, free Tibet or free Palestine? We don't exactly know where those places are, but free them. Why not free them? So the question is, you know, what happens to those people then when they turn 30, 40, 50 years old, take out mortgages, start families? I am not worried overall about American support for Israel in the long term. That said, the state of Israel could do a lot of things to make our lives as Jewish diaspora easier, but they shouldn't do those things in order to make our lives easier. They should do those things first and foremost because it serves the safety and security and future of Israelis. Which doesn't mean that we don't all wish for an easier future.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up for questions. I think some of you might have questions. We have one right here. I'm going to walk around with the microphone. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Fred Hertz, and I'm a member of the Jewish community of the East Bay. Thank you, Professor Hollister. One brief request and then a question. As somebody who has benefited from many of the activities at the center, I want to encourage you to include the Jewish community of the East Bay as part of your community who would benefit from what you're doing. There are very few people in the East Bay who know about it or show up. And there hasn't been much of an effort to reach out. And it includes New Lair House, it includes the JCC, it also includes alumni. You've got a lot on your plate, I know, but I think it would be great for the community and for the Institute to bring more people onto campus. So that's just my encouragement. My question is, how do you explain the lefty Jewish anti-Zionists? JVP, whatever group it is, what's your theory there? I'd really appreciate hearing.
Great. And I also appreciate your first comment. We advertise our talks as widely as we possibly can. As you can imagine, as an academic institution, our primary focus is our students, especially undergrads. We don't have a huge advertising staff, but each and every one of our events is advertised in the J, is advertised on our website. We have had at the last two events, which I've hosted, 350 community members at each.
That's great.
So it's not as if the community is not showing up. 350 community members each. And by the way, these were events. Never once in the history of our Helen Diller Institute have we had interruptions, have we had protests, because these are really very, very serious academic events with global experts. But yes, we should advertise more, and we'll continue to advertise and do as many events as we can, as long as we can focus on our students. How do I explain lefty Jewish anti-Zionism? I'm going to give you a cop-out answer. It's not a new phenomenon. From the birth of Zionism, we've had, in the beginning, it was in fact a majority of Jews who resisted the movement. So why did they do this? Some for religious reasons. That's not relevant to your question because you're asking about the left. And that's a minuscule number, certainly here in the Bay Area. Some because they're scared. They're scared. They want to be liked by the non-Jewish left. They want to appease. And so they bow their heads, right? I mean, I see Zionism as the Jewish movement for self-empowerment, for self-determination, for emancipation. That angers many non-Jews. How dare you be emancipated? How dare you demand a country? Kurds should get a country. Palestinians should get a country. Jews don't get a country. Jews don't get to have an army. Jews don't get to vote for a Jewish prime minister or name streets after, great literary figures and great Jewish philosophers and great Jewish leaders. Other countries get to do that. You don't get to be emancipated. So in my mind, your question is similar to the question of how do I explain women who are anti-feminist? How do I explain people of color who turn their back on the civil rights movement? It's deeply puzzling. I suspect that it's in part a function of fear and an attempt to blend in and cause as little ruckus as possible. Because Jews who demand emancipation, demand rights, speak loudly and they stand loudly and they stand proudly and they support, and as we all know, they build things, and that can be seen as uppity. So that's my best explanation. It's not much of an explanation. It's a real puzzle.
Stephen Resnick, East Bay, member of the Jewish community. Appreciate the fact that you've got 1,000 people who are interested in taking classes and probably another 1,000 or 2,000 who just hate Israel and always will and all Jews. But there's tens of thousands of very smart kids who are going through Cal and UCLA, and 20 years from now, they're going to be on the Berkeley School Board District, and they're going to be city council members, and they're going to be heads of corporations. And what I wonder about is, are we educating a group of people who don't care about Israel or the Middle East? I mean, they're doing their physics and they're doing their Middle Eastern, not Middle Eastern, but Italian history studies, whatever it is. And they're all going to be heads of corporations and presidents of companies. And all they've heard their whole life in the background, the smoke, was that Israel's the bad actor in all this stuff. And they're going to be the next generation of leaders. And I wonder, are we, what can we do to improve the messaging there? And is my concern out of, are they just all going to get smarter, as you said, and we don't have to worry about this?
So as I claimed, in fact, I can show, most of the many hundreds of students who take our classes are not Jewish students. And I'll say something even more provocative. Most students on the Berkeley campus are not interested in any of this. They're interested in getting good grades, going to law school, making a lot of money. They don't stop for the protests, not the pro-Israel protests, not the anti-Israel protests. By my estimation, and I can tell you how I arrived at this figure, less than 1% of Berkeley students is in any way involved, either for or anti in these protests. Think of the massive Berkeley tent encampment, 50 tents of which half are standing empty or stood empty before they were vacated. And of that half again were not filled by students at all, by adults. It's pretty easy to see, even though they're covering their faces because they're cowards. So the student interest, I'd say by and large, they're as excited about this topic as they are about Myanmar or Kashmir or Western Sahara or any other topic. But I'm very, very happy that the sort of average student in our classes is not Israeli or Palestinian or Jewish or Muslim. They're just sort of Berkeley students. How can we create, and I share your concern, right? That 20, 30 years down the line, they won't necessarily emerge with sort of a hatred or anger towards Israel, but you'll ask them, where do you want to go on vacation? Would you like to go to Israel on a trip? And they'd say, I'd rather go to Egypt. That is the extent of my concern. So what can we do against this? Invest. Take more of them on trips. Take more of them on scholarly exchanges. Offer more classes. Offer more opportunities. So right now I take 10 Berkeley students and 10 Stanford students together on a winter trip to Israel every year. That's 20 kids. Interesting, by the way, combining those two communities on one trip. The thinking is if they can get along, peace in the Middle East may not be seen. We take a similar number, maybe 20, 30, to an extensive summer program in Israel where they do internships, they learn the language, they travel the country, they earn credits towards classes. If we could double that number, that would be great. If instead of teaching 1,200, 1,300 students a year, if we could teach 2,000, 3,000, that would be great. Right now, we are fundraising with enthusiasm towards hiring Berkeley's first expert in Israel studies. I hold a chair in Israel studies, the Helen Diller Chair in Israel studies, but Israel is sort of a hobby of mine. I study war, I study religion, so of course, Israel fits in. I'm Israeli, I'm passionate about Israel, but we don't have on the Berkeley campus a professor who is an expert on Israel. If we had such a professor, we'd be able to double the number of students we teach every year, and that professor would also lead our minor. If you could do the same at other universities, if you could do the same even at the high school level. One of the many reasons why I am utterly unhesitant in my Zionism and my love for Israel, other than the fact that it's where I was raised, is that I've never taken anyone to Israel who has not come back in love. And it does not require hasbara. It does not require brainwashing. You know, it's sort of carefully need to lead them to particular places, but others. You set them loose in Israel for 2 weeks, and they come back with stars in their eyes, which proves to me again and again and again that I'm on the right side of history, right? If I could take 2 times, 3 times as many students, it would be better. And then you know that there are other initiatives to take leaders, to take mayors. Joy, you know more about this than I do. The more of that we can do, just expose people to the beauty of Israel and the truth of Israel, I think that would help.
That's great. We have time for one last question. And well, okay, fine. One last question, and then we're going to wrap up.
Hi, Ron. Laura Lauder, San Francisco Bay Area or Peninsula Jewish community. My question is, it seems like we're finding a lot of tents coming from the same Amazon source, and it seems like a lot of the posters are all coming from with the same language and even made the same way. I'm curious if, first of all, while you were in your office, did anyone from the other side ever come see you? And number 2, do we have spies in their tents to hear what's going on? Or is there any way that we can understand better how organized they are? Who's organizing this? Who's funding this? Thanks.
Great question that I have no answer to. So I have an answer to your, well, it is in the nature of very good questions that they're very hard to answer. I have an answer to your little question in the middle. Did people from quote unquote the other side come to visit? My protest was not about Gaza, pro-Israel, anti-Israel. My protest was about anti-Semitism. So, of course, people from the other side, anti-Semites, did not come to visit, but Jews of all backgrounds and all colors came to visit, including anti-Zionist Jews, who had fascinating conversations in my office with Zionist Jews. Sadly, in the course of those conversations, it became very, very clear that they didn't know much, and they didn't think much. That they were rather simple-minded in their opinions. That was a big disappointment because I sort of wanted to engage and wanted a teaching opportunity, and there really wasn't much there other than Israel is an illegal entity and needs to be destroyed. Okay, and then what? Like, what's your positive plan? Israel is an illegal entity and needs to be destroyed. Okay, I understand. What do we know about the movement? We know. And Laura, you know this as well as I do, it's not a grassroots movement. It's not. We even now know, as of this week, that the big walkouts from Bay Area high schools were not a grassroots, which should not surprise us. Really? Like 14-year-olds decided to all stand up in the middle of class and walk out. Geez, if my 14-year-old is half an hour late to class, she needs a note from her parents. Hundreds of 14-year-olds stood up and walked out of the classroom, and all the teachers were, fantastic, we'll march with you. Of course it's organized. I don't know who's organizing it, and I don't have the tools and shouldn't have the tools to investigate it. I read that there are now people in Washington, D.C. who have started investigating where the money's coming from. I think that's interesting. I should note, because though I hold a chair in Israel studies, I'm everybody's professor. I love all my students. I care about all my students. A lot of these protests are legitimate. It's okay to protest against what the Israeli government is doing. There are anti-government protests in Tel Aviv every evening by the many, many thousands. Many of these protests are legitimate, many of them are not. So it's the illegitimate ones that we're interested in. It's the ones that are violent, it's the ones that are racist, it's the ones that are calling for violence. They are, as you say, you described exactly right. They're all using the same tents, they're all using the same language, they're giving the same speeches in the same order. We know of some of the organizations that seem to be coordinating that effort, but because they are cowards and are masked, it's very hard to know who they are. I should say it's the first protest movement on the Berkeley campus, other than Antifa, that saw fit to hide its identity. Right? Civil rights movement was not masked. Free speech movement was not masked. The anti-Vietnam movement was not masked. They did not scream racist slogans. Nobody in the anti-Vietnam movement supported the Viet Cong or called for the death of American soldiers. This is in many ways a very, very different movement. And boy, wouldn't we love to know.
Professor Haffner. Much from you in the last 9 months. And I think we're just so lucky to have you and at the Institute. And you told us how we can support you. I heard that. So for those of you who have donor advised funds, when I tell you the Federation is the single largest funder of Jewish causes in the Bay Area, it's because we give away $200 million every year to thousands of places, including places like the Institute and the other organizations that were mentioned today. And that's one thing we can do to keep our campuses safe and thriving. So thank you for everything. I think your other big lesson that I love is just use your body, do something, go to a rally, pick up the phone, do something just to be in community to help us. So thank you for those lessons and being with us today. Before I conclude the event, I'm going to invite my colleague, Rabbi Jessica Kirshner, who's Executive Director of Hillel at Stanford, to share a few words of hope and optimism. And as she's walking up here, I'd like to ask my colleagues at the Federation to please stand up and wave your hands, because these are also the people who are leaders in our community. They are raising money, working in community security, they're making grants, they're putting on events like today, and we couldn't do it without them. They're a stellar team, and you heard a little bit about what they were doing. So I want to thank you again for your generosity, for being here today, for everything that you're doing. I hope you will consider making a gift to the annual campaign. Take a look on our website at all the impact investing opportunities and make gifts to your local institutions in the Jewish community to keep us thriving. So thank you. And now I'd like to invite you to come here, Jessica. She is a spiritual leader who has played an instrumental role in helping our college students feel safe and supported. We are so grateful for your guidance and wisdom during these challenging times. You have had a rough go of it. We are just so thankful for your leadership. It is really an inspiration to me and everybody else here. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. I think some of that was kinder than I deserved, but I appreciate it. I also realized as I was sitting here that I'm a product of Federation programs in all kinds of ways. I grew up in Oakland, and Temple Sinai is a formative place for me and for my family. My first trip to Israel was on an East Bay Federation trip. I went to Camp Swig and Camp Newman. I was the president of the student board at Berkeley Hillel, and then went to HUC, which is also supported by Federation in a number of ways, and eventually made my way back here after being a congregational rabbi, and am now back in the Hillel world and a member of a congregation on the peninsula. So in so many ways, I have benefited from the generosity of people who supported Federation and a Federation's vision for what the Bay Area Jewish community could be. And I'm deeply grateful for that, and also proud to now be an adult and a parent and a Jewish professional and everything, and a rabbi who can do that and be part of it in my own way and continue to pay things forward. But I've benefited from it enormously. I wondered if I should approach this as a Hillel director or as a rabbi. Those are slightly different. And because you were going to hear a lot about campus, I decided maybe we'll lean into rabbi for the moment. So stretch in your chair for a sec, get a little bit comfortable. This hopefully will not go on so long, but I did want to root us in Jewish wisdom and things that we all share, whether we are connected to campuses or not connected to campuses, and that I think deeply underpin why we care about what we care about and how we choose to approach the moments in history in which we find ourselves and how we orient ourselves to the world and the people around us. And I wanted to start with some jokes, which I put in a sermon about hope in 2018, and I'm not certain they're going to land the same in 2024. So I want to test them on you. First, old Jewish joke. What is a Jewish telegram? It reads, "Start worrying, details to follow." A rabbi asks an elderly congregant if she saw a certain article in a Jewish magazine. "Oh, I don't subscribe to it anymore," she replies. "What magazine do you read then?" asked the rabbi. "I read the Klansman," answered the elderly woman. "The Klansman?" bursts out the rabbi. What hate-filled, vile, no good rag? How could you bear to have that filthy thing in your home?" "You should understand, Rabbi," says the old woman. "I am old, and pain keeps me up at night. When I read our Jewish magazines, they tell me that anti-Semitism is on the rise, that arguments about who is a Jew are tearing our people apart, that the loss of our younger generation is accomplishing the decimation that Hitler, Yamach Shmo, wanted. Oy, I stay awake all night with worry. But when I pick up a copy of The Klansman and read that Jews control all of the media, that their power grows every year, the banks and international finance are in their hands, I sleep like a baby." The joke still works. Okay. I actually take a lot of comfort out of that in some ways, because I was worried it would sound too close to the world in which we are finding ourselves. And I think if we can still laugh, one, we're still Jews, and still using humor as an incredible tool for resilience. And two, maybe things are not as dark as we fear they are in the moments when we are most fearful. And that is part of what I want to talk about. But first, I want to talk about Elijah. Elijah, the prophet, used to visit a certain town regularly and mingled among people, especially poorer folks who clustered in doorways and the entrances to community courtyards. In a fit of civic responsibility, the most affluent members of this community taxed themselves to build gates and walls for protection. These people did nothing wrong. In fact, they were fulfilling their obligation as property owners. But after this, Elijah was not seen in this community again. When gates and walls went up, the voices of the poor could no longer be heard in the community, and so it was no longer a place for Elijah either. Elijah is a really interesting character in Jewish tradition. He's a prophet, he's a shapeshifter, he's a bestower of gifts to the deserving but unsuspecting. One day, Elijah is the one who will stand at the Golden Gate, not that one, the one in Jerusalem, and blow the shofar to announce the coming of the Messiah and the healing and perfection of the world. It is because of this last quality that we leave space for him at every bris and every baby naming, at every Passover Seder. Elijah is the symbol of our ongoing hope for redemption and our conviction that the seeds of this can be found in the ordinary, extraordinary cycles of every day. Elijah is the embodiment of Jewish hope. I wonder, what would it feel like to live cut off from hope? I'm afraid that after October 7th, many of us know this feeling. It is too close to our hearts. It is right before our eyes. Many of us are fearful that on our watch, what we are seeing the rise of authoritarianism, the undermining of democratic institutions, the deadly closing of the heart to people who do not look or believe the same. We are watching a resurgence of anti-Semitism. We are seeing the coarsening of political culture and even interpersonal dialogue in our own country, in Israel, and around the world. We feel the profound vulnerability of Israelis and Jews in the United States. We feel all of these things and also feel powerless to change them. And so the temptation is to despair. Those of us who are able to use our privilege to build up whatever walls and gates we can to keep ourselves safe in fearful times often do so. We aren't doing anything wrong, per se, but in this instinctive crouch of self-protection, hope has no point of entry. Avoidance, numbing, resignation, despair, this orientation to the darkness of the world, as tempting as it is fundamentally not Jewish. It is not worthy of the Pintele Yid, the shining Jewish soul that God has placed in each of us. The Jewish orientation to the world is fundamentally hopeful. It's deeply pragmatic. It's cut through with gallows humor. Maybe it has a suitcase packed in the corner, but it is ultimately hopeful. A century ago, the religious Zionist leader Rav Kook said, "If you find yourself in a dark place, don't waste your time cursing the darkness. Just light a candle. That is the Jewish way. We are a community who care deeply about American thriving and Israeli thriving, and particularly the thriving of Jews in both places. With this in mind, I want to offer a text that came out of what felt like a very dark moment for much of our American Jewish community, in the hope that it can bring light to a dark moment for our Israeli community and to the connections between us. On New Year's Eve in 2016, Valerie Kaur, who's a Stanford alumna and a Sikh American civil rights activist, spoke at a midnight mass at a church just a few blocks from the White House. She said, "We have seen darkness before. The mother in me asks, what if this darkness is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? What if our America is not dead, but a country that is waiting to be born? What if the story of America is one long labor? What does the midwife tell us to do? Breathe, and then push. Because if we don't push, we will die. If we don't push, our nation will die. Tonight we will breathe, and tomorrow we will labor in love. This is not the love of oozing sentimentality, but the love that is the driving force for social movements around the world. This is the stuff of poets, parents, and of prophets, those who understand love to be an inexhaustible wellspring that can inspire and embolden us to rise up with courage we did not know we had. Jewish history can be read as a series of travails through narrow, closed-off places into something resembling light, redemption, and hope. When the ghetto was first imposed on the Jews of Venice in 1516, it was a terrible shock. Venice was the most cosmopolitan city in the world, and this was the first time that its diverse Jewish community was forcibly relocated, with gates locked at night to keep them in. In such a setting, there was every reason for hopelessness. Inscribed above the doorway of the Canton Schola, the smallest of the 4 synagogues of the ghetto, is something remarkable. There's the phrase, Nitchadesh shel sheyesh. Let us renew with what there is. This is not a well-known Jewish teaching. It's a message that the people who built the synagogue wrote for themselves. From where we are, we will build anew. This was their daily sermon to themselves and to their children. The word Nitchadesh, let us renew, is in the future tense. It's a Jewish way of saying we shall overcome. The phrase is stated in the plural. It's a reminder that none of us are alone, that we are in this together. Even more, Nitchadesh is a reflexive verb, something that you do for yourself. This was not a prayer asking God for help. It was 3 words in which they were affirming that they were both the agents and the objects of their renewal, that the potential for renewal and transformation is always at hand. Nitchadesh shel sheyesh. We will renew with what there is. We will not focus on what is or isn't, on what has been lost, on what we no longer have. We will move forward with what we do have. As Jews have said for millennia, we will make do. We will renew with what there is. We will open the door wherever we are, and lo, Elijah will be waiting on the other side. But we have to open the door. What keeps us from opening the door to hope, from remaining in conversation with Elijah? Fear, isolation, numbness, and despair are the 4 horsemen of spiritual apocalypse, but fear rides at the front. And as we feel vulnerability both in our homes, in both of our homes, in America and in Israel, we are in danger of being driven by fear into isolation, numbness, and despair. The Jewish way is to tame our fears and open our hearts towards trust in order to make space for hope. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel taught, hope is a conviction rooted in trust, an ability to soar above the darkness that overshadows the divine. Another word for that kind of trust is faith, but not a blind faith or a resigned faith. In Judaism, faith is not acceptance, but protest against a world that is, in the name of the world that is not yet, but ought to be. Protest against the very belief that we are powerless to make change. This kind of faith is our bulwark against fear. A friend told me a story of her grandmother that comes out of the Holocaust, and I just have to say it is a tough story, but I think it is a really important one. Her grandmother was a Hungarian Jewish woman who survived Auschwitz. She was pregnant when she arrived at the camp, but her pregnancy wasn't spotted. She managed to conceal it until one night in a barrack with 1,000 other women, she went into labor. A midwife from her home community helped deliver the baby, which to everyone's surprise was born alive. The mother and the midwife and every woman there knew that this child could not survive. And if it were found, it would mean death for everyone who was there that night. As the midwife took the baby away, she told my friend's grandmother, "This baby cannot survive, but you will survive and live to have more children. This is the darkest place, but it is not the end, and you must have hope." I don't know how anybody survives such a soul-crushing experience. I would say that it is impossible. But I heard this story from this woman's granddaughter, while her great-grandson played on the floor with my daughters at our feet. And what I felt inside watching these babies was grief and the most profound feeling of awe. How can we close the door to Elijah? How can we fail to find hope in our own dark days when we are the legacy of women like this? So how do we do it? How do we tap into this stubborn streak of pragmatic hope, which is our birthright? Rabbi Haskell Lookstein points to the example of the Lubavitcher Rebbe as a realist who approached reality from a mindset of optimism. For example, apparently he never used the traditional Hebrew word for hospital, which is Beit Cholim, because it means the house of sick people. He instead called it a Beit Refuah, a house of healing, because he wanted to focus the minds of the people in that hospital on the solution rather than on the problem. He never referred to the finishing time of a project as a deadline. Instead, he used the word due date. Deadline connotes death, while due date is birth. When somebody would sigh in his presence and say, "This wird sein und Yid," he would reply with the declaration of his forebear, the Tzemach Tzedek, "This gut sein und Yid." It is good to be a Jew. The Jewish people, despite our heavy history, are still hopeful because we remember that we have absolute freedom, not necessarily over the systems that we are part of, but over our responses to them. We can change our behavior if we want to. We can control our appetites if we choose to. We do not have to be ruled by our passions if we decide accordingly. We can actually transform ourselves if we so desire, and we can transform our world. This is a great gift from God. Nothing is determined. Unlike in other religions, everything is in our hands, so we should never give in to despair. I'm not saying this is easy, that there isn't pain enough in life to break every heart, but the wounds we sustain in the epic struggle will always cleave to hope. These are our battle wounds, the scars we should point to with honor, as if to say, "This is what I fight for." And we do it together. Theodore Herzl said, "We are one people. Our enemies have made us one without our consent, as repeatedly happens in history. Distress binds us together, and thus united, we suddenly discover our strength. Yes, we are strong enough to form a state, and indeed a model state. We possess all human and material resources necessary for the purpose." At the end of our lives, the Talmud tells us, we will be asked a number of questions by the heavenly court. Did you conduct your business affairs honestly? Did you study Torah? Did you learn to discern what is true from what is false? Did you expect deliverance and redemption? Was Elijah a frequent companion on your journey? May we all do our best to answer this question in the affirmative and to do it together. One of our best structures for doing this is the Federation and all of our networks of Jewish organizations. So thank you, all of you, professionals and lay leaders, for your leadership and for your support. And have a wonderful Tuesday.